Okay, we are now live broadcasting. So, hello, if there's anybody out there in YouTube land that is watching along or watching the recording afterwards. And hey to everybody that's joined us in Zoom today. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. On today's Tech Talks, we were going to talk about the rich content editor in Canvas and talk a little bit about some simple graphic design tips to kind of make your Canvas pages look a little slicker, look a little more user friendly. I'm not going to go into super in-depth graphic design stuff, although I'm always happy to talk about that on more of a one-on-one basis. If you ever have something in mind that you want to play around with, I'm happy to help with that. But I do have some good basic tips and tricks that I can show you. So I'm going to share my Canvas screen here. Where did I put it? There it is. And we'll get right into it. So I just have a really basic, excuse me, frog in my throat. Let me get a drink of water here. I have just a basic page that I've already created here that has some text content. This is text that I would have on sort of the intro page or the home page or the start here page of a course. It's got content in it, but it's just text. So what kinds of things could I do using the rich content editor to spice this up a little bit? You know, maybe I want to put a picture of myself in here. Maybe I want to make that pull quote a little more eye-catching. Maybe I want to have a little breakout box or a sidebar with my contact info in it. So how can I do those things? Well, let's get into it and let's do it. So again, this is just a page. Usually you would go through the modules and make a new page, or you might make it as your home page, but however you get to a Canvas page, we're going to edit that. So the first thing I want to just go over real quickly is the content editor, because this has changed in the last couple of months. Ben, do you remember when the RCE rolled out? Was that in December, January?
Yeah, I think it was the start of winter quarter.
Okay, that sounds about right. So if you've been using Canvas for a while, you're probably used to the old editor, which had like a sidebar along the side for adding Canvas content, adding pages and modules and whatever. But all that's kind of been rearranged, and I wouldn't exactly say hidden, because personally I like this editor layout better. It's just a little more user friendly. But if you were used to the old Canvas page editor, it's a change, and it takes a little bit of getting used to. The main thing to be aware of is they've moved a lot of stuff into this little menu here, this sub menu. So if you go to view, you can switch between the normal full screen editor and the HTML editor, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Insert is where they put most of the stuff that was in that sidebar. So if you want to put in a direct link to an assignment or a page or a video or something, they put it under this insert menu. Format has, you know, the basic bold, underline, italic, changing your text color, changing your font sizes, changing the headings and that sort of thing. Tools has a couple of things in here, the word count, if that's important to you. You can add specific apps, or maybe that's something that we can do as admins, but there's not really anything there. And then there's a new menu just for tables, for making tables and for styling them. And then the most commonly used buttons are always visible: bold, italic, changing color, adding a link, adding a picture, changing the text from paragraphs to headers or whatever. So it's pretty self-explanatory, but again, if you're used to the old style, it may have kind of caught you by surprise. So I just wanted to kind of point some of those things out. So now I want to actually start doing some stuff with this page. The simplest thing, and something that we should really always be doing anyway, is making good use of headers. both for the visual aspect of it, but also the accessibility aspect of it. Because if you have a student that uses a screen reader, if they are vision impaired or for whatever reason they use some kind of assistive technology, a lot of those systems really rely on headers for navigation. Because if I have a heading 1 that says welcome to class, and then a heading 2 that says class schedule, another heading 2 that says contact information. If a student is using a screen reader, they depend on those headers for navigation. So if they are just looking for your contact info, rather than looking at the page visually, they're tabbing between those headings. So if you have descriptive headings, that makes it more accessible to those students, but it also visually makes it more accessible for everybody. It makes it easier for you to just quickly scan a page at a glance and look for the information you're looking for. So to do that, let's just make a couple of headings in here really quickly. Let's just make a little welcome heading. So I select the text where it says paragraph. I'll change that to heading 2 because heading 1 is already used up by the page's title. That automatically becomes heading 1. But we can change that to heading 2. And it makes it bigger, makes it bolder, makes it more visually obvious. But after we've changed it to a heading, we can still style this further. So I could make this bolder. I could change the font size to be a little bit bigger if I wanted it to. I could also change the text color. So let's say I want to make these like a dark blue. That's a little bit too dark. I almost can't tell if that's blue. Let's make that, there we go. So now it's a little more visually distinct. I can see that more obviously. Let's put a couple more in here. Let's put a what do you do to get started? And a contact info one. Bigger, change the color.
How many colors should I use, Caleb? I love lots of colors.
People love having tons and tons of colors and highlights everywhere and at all times. No, it is usually best to kind of limit your color scheme to something that's pretty, I'm not going to say basic, but kind of have a color palette that you use. Don't use a bunch of different colors. Obviously, be aware of things like contrast and background, because that's also an accessibility issue. If somebody is not extremely vision impaired, but doesn't have the best vision, like myself, if you have really bad contrast, if I made these headers like a light gray, well, light gray on a white background is really hard to read for anybody, but especially somebody that doesn't have perfect vision. Putting white text on yellow as a highlighter is really hard for anybody to read. Some of these things are pretty common sense, but there's actually accessibility standards about color contrast where at a certain point, the contrast between a background and a foreground color becomes just a little bit too poor, and it'll throw up error messages saying, well, the contrast on this is not very good. You may want to reevaluate that. But it's just something to be aware of. Try to have high contrast. It's usually best in most situations to have a dark colored text on a light background. So that could be a dark blue, it could be a dark red, it could be black, it could be a really dark gray. But just keep that contrast in mind. So here, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can I ask 2 follow-up questions about the screen reader?
Yeah.
So just by making your text bigger and not actually changing it to heading does nothing for a screen reader, is that correct?
That is correct. So I definitely want to change it to a header, even though I'm also doing some styling things to it. I'm also making it bold and bigger and colored. We also want to make sure we're actually changing those header tags because yes, those tags that say, if we were to look at the HTML code of this, and we're not going to really get into that, but if we did, it would say H2, welcome to class, H2, where to go first. And those H tags are what those screen readers are really looking for.
And then will their a student screen reader tell them the difference between a header 3, 2, and 1? Like, will they know, oh, this is more important because it's 3, not 1?
Yeah, and that's actually something that the screen reader user can customize. So usually if somebody's like really dependent on a screen reader, they are going to customize the heck out of that thing to their specific needs. But they can have it read aloud. Heading 1, Tech Talks. Heading 2, Welcome to Class. Heading 2, Where to Go First. So usually what most screen readers will do is the very first thing that they do upon opening a page is it'll read out sort of a table of contents of all of the headers on that page. And then the user can either choose to just keep reading from top to bottom, the whole page in its entirety, or they can go just to a particular header and then start reading from there. So using those heading tags is very important for that kind of accessibility. So that's just something really basic. You can do that in 30 seconds and a page is already going to be more visually interesting. It's going to be more readable, both for people that use screen readers, but really for everybody. That's, that's a universal design principle, right? We can do things that make content universally more accessible. So that's a really simple one. But let's say I want to add a picture in here because this is my welcome page. I want them to see what I look like. So let's add a picture. I'm just going to put it right here next to my welcome. So I would click into the page. I'm going to click on the the icon looks like a little photograph. So click on that. I'm going to upload an image. Wait, actually, I could upload an image from my computer, but I actually have one in this course already. So let's do that. If we click on the little arrow next to it, I can either upload an image or I can use images that I already have in the course. So we'll do course images. And I've got a bunch of stuff in here, but there's my picture right there. So it's just going to drop that image in at its full size. In this case, that's probably bigger than I want it to be. So let's see if we can adjust that a little bit, because that's a big picture. So if I select it, I can resize this image by grabbing on these little boxes in the corner. So let's resize that down to something a little bit more manageable. But by default, when you throw an image into a Canvas page like this, it just kind of sits there and breaks up the text. I could put it above the text, I could put it below it, but then it leaves all this space over here. What if I wanted to take this image and have it kind of float in its own little breakout box so that the text flows around it? That would be more visually interesting. It would make the page more readable because I'm not leaving a huge chunk of white space between my header and then the actual text. So to do that, we do actually need to look in the code, but I want to tell you that this is not that hard to do. And this is something that you can do even if you don't understand all the HTML stuff. So I'm going to show you how to do this. You can watch the recording later, or you can message me, email me if you want to try this on your own. But in the rich content editor, if I click on this little icon that looks like a couple of brackets, that switches me into the HTML editor mode. So I can see all those tags in here. See, I can see the header tag that tells the page that this text is a header. But what I'm looking for is this image tag right here, because this is the code that tells it to put my picture in that place. But something that I can do to this image is I can add a style to it. And there are tons of different styles that you can use the code to do, but I'm going to do something very simple. It's just called an image float. So to do that, I'm going to type in style equals quotation mark, and then I'm going to do a float. So I'm going to say float colon, and we'll float right. So it'll show up on the right side of this page. And then I put a semicolon, I put a close quotation mark, and this little chunk of code right here that I typed in with that image, that's all you need to do to make that image float to the side. So once we do that, let's see what that looks like. And now my image has popped over to the side and the text floats around it. So just by doing that, I have kind of made the flow of the text a lot nicer than it was a second ago, but the image is still available. I could have also done a float left, so it would show up on the other side of the page and the text would flow around the other side of it. There's other things I can do with that float. So I could also add some extra space padding around it so that the text isn't so close to it. But again, I'm not going to go super deep into the code stuff right now. I would happily do that with you later if you want to dive a little deeper. But that's just a really simple way of adding some visual flair to a page with just a little bit of graphic design trickery.
Is there a way, Caleb, to not do the code for that? Like if you put the picture right before hello and maybe align it, does it automatically flip it over there?
Well, it doesn't. So let's put another one in here down on the bottom just so I can show you what you can do without the code. Throw that picture back in there again. It got really big, so we need to shrink that down again. So the problem is that without doing anything with the code, the image is always going to be what's called in line with the text. And this happens in like a Word document also, where it's always going to try to either put it above or below or in line with this sentence here. But if I go to the image options, let's see here. So image options, we don't really have anything we can do there, but I can select this and change the alignment of it. Let's see what happens if we do that. Oh, Ben, did you just make a liar of me?
Yeah, that's my trick.
Does it actually put a float on it?
Yeah, it does. And
oh my gosh, Ben.
Since I'm just a total hack and I have no idea what I'm doing, I've got to figure things out this way rather than knowing the correct way of doing it.
Oh my gosh, I actually did not know that it was that simple. Well, okay, so forget that last thing I just said. You can still get into the code and there's other things you can do to it, like I said. And again, I'd be happy to show you that, or you can just select the image, change its alignment and align right, and that will make it float. So now it's aligned to the left. It's floating on that side of the text, or it's floating over to the right. There we go. So that's actually easier. Do what Ben said. Another way that you can do some page layout fun stuff is you can use tables as a form of layout, but if you are not careful with your tables, then that again can become an accessibility issue with screen readers. So screen readers are going to read columns of text in a table from left to right. So they're going to read the first cell. Well, let me just give you an example here. I have some space up here, so I'm going to go to table. And let's say I make a 4x4 grid. So a screen reader is going to read this from left to right and then top to bottom. So it's going to read whatever's in this cell, then whatever's in this cell, then whatever's in this cell, then whatever's in this cell. So if I were to put content in a grid like this, I would need to be very careful about how I order that text, because if I put my picture in this cell and then my name underneath it, and then Ben's picture in this cell and then Ben's name underneath it, that might make sense from somebody that's looking at the page visually. But if they are using the screen reader, it's going to say image of Caleb, image of Ben, Caleb Hutchins, Ben Whitmore, which is not going to make sense to the screen reader. So if you want to use tables to do anything with layout, be very aware of how those grids are laid out. Now, what I'm going to do to prevent that from really being a problem, let me delete this table. Lets me. Table go away. There we go. I'm going to make a table, but I'm just going to have 2 cells in a row. I'm not going to have multiple cells. So we'll do a table. and we'll put in 2 cells like this. So what I want to do is I want to take this quote here that I have, and I want to put it next to an image. Not because I'm conveying extra information, but just because visually I want to make it look a little bit more interesting than just having the quote there by itself. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut out that text. Cut. I'm going to paste it into this cell right there. I'm going to make it look a little bit bigger. I'm not going to change the heading on this to a header because it's not a header, it's just a quote, but I want to make it more visually distinct. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Let's make it like that. And then I want to put an image on the other side of it. So we're going to insert a course image. Oh, I had one that I wanted to use. Where did that go? Let's see if this one works. There we go. There. So I just want to put a little animated GIF to go along with that. So by doing it in this way, I have some control over the layout. Let's see what that looks like after I save it. So now I have a fun little image to go with it. I need to put an alt tag on it, so I haven't done that yet. And then a quote, and then I have the content of my page. But I also have these boxes around it because the table is showing up. And I don't really want to show the table. I'm just using it for layout. So we can actually change that if we want to. If I select this table and I go to the table menu and I go to table properties, I can make that border disappear just by changing border width to 0. And then the border is, I can still see it when I'm editing the page, so I know where things are. I could also adjust the size of this if I want to. Then now if I look at it, no borders. Now I just have a nice image and a pull quote, and then I have the content of the page underneath it. You can do some other things with a table. Let's say I want to put my contact information in a box because I wanted to make it look more visually distinct so that it's easy for students to find that. If I go to table and just make a single celled table, let's get rid of this extra image for now. And let's say I put my contact information inside of that. And now let's go to table properties again. And if we go to the advanced table properties, we can put a background color on it. Let's do, again, we want it to be light because we want to be conscious of the contrast here. And let's take off the border again. So now I have that in a colored box, and hopefully that's a little more visually distinct. Maybe I don't want this in the very bottom of the page. Maybe I would put it up a little bit higher. But we can also, let's see if Ben's floating trick works on this table as well. So I can change the size of that so it's only maybe this big. And let's see if we can float that. So we'll go over to the alignment tool. Oh, see, that's just going to float the text inside of it, isn't it? So for this one, we might actually have to get into the code, Ben. So let's do the same thing here. I have my table right here. I can see that it's the table. And we already have some styles in here, but let's just add float right. And now that floats over to the side. I could move this. Let's see if it lets me move it here or not. It might not. Let's just take that whole chunk of code out of there and move it up here. And now I have my sidebar popping up alongside the text. And again, I might want to put There we go. So now I have a sidebar with text in it. I could put contact information, I could put my phone number, I could put my email, my Zoom room, or whatever I wanted in there as a sidebar there. And again, as long as we are only doing one cell, it shouldn't cause any screen reader problems. Although, again, I would want to be very careful about how I structure my information with the table. So those are just a few quick things that you can do in the content editor to add some visual interest to your page, to organize content, or to call out content that you want to make more obvious to your students. And that was just a handful of things, just enough to cover in about 20-25 minutes. There's way more things that we can do that are more or less complicated depending on what we want to do with it. But that is something that I can help you with if you ever want to go down that road. My background before becoming an instructional designer was a graphic designer. So I learned all the code stuff. I learned how to build web pages. I learned how to lay out content in different programs and some of those design principles. So I'm happy to put those skills to work for you if you ever want to go down that road.
And I think this is headers and some space is a really good way of organizing the content. Caleb, I want to say thanks for pointing that out. Mm-hmm. Also, moving things over to the right and creating a denser box with headers is nice because students don't have to scroll as long. I've heard students explicitly say, well, it was like 4 scrolls. This page went forever. I had to scroll like 4 times.
Yeah.
And that's something I think we want to be thoughtful about is, how are we organizing our information? Not necessarily how many scrolls they have to do to get through your content, but that is something that they consider and they think about, and keeping it a little more organized with headers is a good way of good start for sure.
Yeah. Well, so before I worked in higher education, I actually worked for a newspaper. And in newspaper design, you have a concept called above the fold and below the fold. Because when you have a great big page and it's folded in half and sitting on a rack at the grocery store, whatever is above the fold is immediately obvious. And you can see it as you walk past down the aisles. Anything below the fold, somebody has to open up the thing and look at it. And we kind of have the same concept on these pages as well, because you sort of have above the fold is the stuff that you see without scrolling. And below the fold is everything that you have to scroll to get to. So it is worth being conscious of that and saying, what content do I want above the fold? What do I want people to see as soon as they load up that page? And then anything else they need to see, well, we can scroll to get to it. And by having headers, it might be obvious. If I had something that said contact information and then more information below the fold on there, at least they see the header and they know, oh, there it is, scroll down and look for it. So those are just some of those kind of design principles that are worth thinking about as you are organizing your content and thinking about what you want people to see first.
Any questions for the illustrious graphic designer, Caleb Hutchins?
I have a quick question. Back up in the headings menu, what does the pre-formatted mean?
So let's look at that really quick. Pre-formatted. I don't know if it's going to actually show us anything if I choose that. Let's see. So what it did is, what's the easiest way to explain this? Let's back up a step. When I'm looking at this page and I see this big paragraph of text, this is going to contract and expand and wrap based on how big my window is. So if I'm on a small window, like a smartphone or something, it's going to break up those lines automatically. But if for some reason I didn't want it to break up these lines, I wanted to have those line breaks exactly where I place them and have that never change, then I could use that pre-formatted option. So if I change this to pre-formatted, then it kind of has a problem with this box in the way. But there's no line breaks here unless I put one there. So if I put a line break in, then it can control that. Let's say I wanted to write a passage of poetry and I want to control where those line breaks are. Then I could use pre-formatted. It's also commonly used for programming or coding where line breaks matter for the code. So they would control that. And then if I save that, so now those line breaks are not going to move other than the one that I put there. I guess that part is, maybe it's because I have that box in there. But it's not something you usually need to use, but if you had a strong reason to have total control over those line breaks, then you would use a preformatted text. Any other questions off the top? I know we kind of covered a lot of stuff, and again, I don't want to scare people off when it comes to having a little bit of control over the HTML, because there's a lot of fun and useful stuff we can do in there. In some previous tech talks, we talked about using tabbed content or accordion content so that you can hide and show content based on those tabs. And that's something that you need to do a little bit of coding to make function. But there's nothing you can do in here that you can break that we can't fix. I always try to make that clear. You can't screw anything up that we can't help you fix. And I'm always happy to sit down with somebody, get onto a Zoom session, share our screens, and look at some of that stuff if you ever want to do that.
Caleb, I have a quick question about number formatting, and I know that we didn't cover, that wasn't covered in this. Mm-hmm. But anytime I have a break, I can't, in Word, I can format a number to start at this number. So if I do like 1, 2, and then I do bullets under 2, and then I come back and I try to do 3, it doesn't, in certain, if there's a gap or if I've inserted something within there, it won't go to the next number. Unless
so you mean the numbered list, you mean? Yeah. So let's try to play with that a little bit and see if we can replicate what you're talking about. We're past our half hour a lot of times, so if anybody needs to disappear, that's totally okay, but I don't, so we're going to keep going on this.
I was going to say we can also do another, you can make this for your last Thursday or Tuesday course.
Well, I think this is probably something we can talk about real quick, because it shouldn't be too difficult to figure out what we can and can't do here. So if I make a numbered list, okay, and then I hit enter, so now I'm on line number 4, and then what do you want to do? You want to make like a,
well, here's the thing. If, let's say with step 1, I say, do this, and then step 2, watch this video, and I put a video in, and then I want to go on to step 3, it will not format it as step 3 unless I put all the content in first and then try to insert something in after. I've had some real problems with working with number formatting.
So you wanted to say insert a picture or a video in here? I see. Let's see if we can get it to not work right for us. This might be something we need to explore a little bit later. We might not have the time to do it all right now, but let's just see what happens. Okay, so I threw an image in there. And in theory, we should be able to do the same thing with like a YouTube video or something. But maybe with a video, it does break that up. So we put a picture in there, and we can still use the numbered list. So that didn't do it. Well, Colette, that might be something we need to sit down and play with. That might be a more interesting question than we can do in 30 seconds.
And maybe it's something that you can actually look on my page, and I'll show you what, I'll show you specifically what I was dealing with.
Yeah, shoot me an email and we'll take a look at it later. Any other questions or comments or ideas or things you've tried to do and haven't been satisfied with?
Caleb, I was just curious regarding the accessibility checker. As we're getting into playing with contrast and different colors and things, will the accessibility tracker, is it sensitive enough to pick up accurate accessibility issues when there's, contrast or colors that we're not supposed to use? Can we use that as our guide when
You know, that's a good question. I don't know if the accessibility checker does contrast or not. Let's test it out and see what happens. So if I take this text and I make it a really light blue, oh, that's the background. We don't want that. Let's change that to a really light blue. That is not good contrast, and I'm sure that is not accessibly correct. So let's see if that gives us any kind of message or error. So it doesn't on the page. If I go to the Ally course report, which is our accessibility checker, let's see if that gives us anything. So it's got images that don't, oh, here we go. HTML content has contrast issues. So if I were to click on this, let's see what it tells us. Yep, and it takes us to this page. HTML content has contrast issues. I wonder if it's going to give us any more detail than just that message, though. It's not. So it'll tell us something on this page has a contrast problem, but it's not going to highlight it or point it out to us, unfortunately. In a situation like that, usually it should be pretty self-evident what the problem is. As I look on this page, I can tell myself, I bet it's this right here that does not have high enough contrast. And if I fix it, that error will go away. So yes, the Ally course report does give us contrast warnings, but it doesn't give us a ton of detail about what the issue is. You'd have to go in there and play with that yourself. And if you ever have run into an issue like that and you can't figure out what the problem is, come talk to us and we can help figure it out.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's good to check on. And there are contrast checkers online where you can type in, you can pick two different colors and then it'll tell you what the contrast is between the two of them and say this is or is not sufficient contrast. So you can be more proactive like that if if you're trying to do something really specific with your colors or your layout or your design and you want to make sure ahead of time that it's acceptable. Just do a Google search for contrast checker and you'll find some tools out there.
And for those watching the video later, I put a link into the chat for Jared's question to webaim.org. Okay. And they have a really good contrast checker that you can throw your colors up there.
Thank you for that.
Perfect. Any other thoughts or questions or future ideas for Tech Talks? Because if you looked at our schedule for the month of March, we don't know what we're doing for the last Tuesday because there's 5 Tuesdays in March. So if you got any ideas?
I was thinking maybe could do the untrained graphic designer version. So you're the one with the polished background, and I can show you some of the ways that I get around maybe finding good colors. Because I think that's hard for people that don't know what to do. So maybe pull out some colors and maybe you know how to make your Canvas page look a little better.
That's not a bad idea. There's some cool websites where it'll help you choose color palettes. It'll give you some that are designed by some artists, or you can pick one color and it'll say, well, these 3 colors are great complements to this color. So yeah, that's an interesting.
Maybe that, or maybe even, everybody likes the cool sketches. Mm-hmm. So grabbing, how to get the color codes and how to build your page with some cool CSS colors and have a sketch in there.
Yeah,
kind of fun.
Be cool.
So if nothing cool comes up, maybe we can do that.
That might be a good one.
Yeah.
Thank you both for today's information.
Thanks, Jared.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Glad you can make it. Keep in touch if you want to try anything out.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, everybody has left, so I guess our Tech Talks are over for the day. I'm going to end the stream. So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week. And